Good morning. My name is Chris Fox, and welcome to part 2 of how to plot a sequel or series. So last week was our introduction. We got into the basic plot idea for Bert 2, which still needs a title, and we'll work on that probably throughout the series. I have some ideas, but here is not the place to discuss it. But we got the basics of that storyline down. Now we need to flesh it out and actually start doing some discovery writing and figuring out, okay, what is this plot going to look like? Who are the characters that are involved, the principal characters? It's going to be mostly people from book 1, so we're revisiting them, we're building on them, we're coming up with new arcs for them. And then for new characters, what are they going to be like? So we're doing a lot of that fleshing out. It'll probably take, I'm thinking, 2 more videos after this one to finish the series. I may not do them all back to back. We'll see how this one is received. But in any case, let's jump in. I will show you over the next, 15 to 20 minutes what the outline looks like now and what the initial discovery writing looks like. So I've got about 2,000 words that sort of set the stage, and then a more or less fully fleshed out outline. Anyway, let's jump in. Okay, so as you can see, I have written the first chapter. So I'm going to start, before we get into the story organization, by just scrolling through this document so you can see what it is I've written. So I'm going to scroll slowly through this. You can pause this if you need to read it. It's about 2,000 words long, so not a terribly long read. And for those that don't feel like reading, I'll explain. What's happening here is we are seeing the players of the game for the first time. And as it turns out, they are in a gaming shop in Santa Rosa, California, based on a gaming shop I used to go to. And they are meeting in the back room to roleplay. And their GM has a magical D20, which allows him to run these games. Now, they used to play with just standard Dungeons & Dragons books like normal people, but they discovered that Todd, the GM, his father, had this D20, and so they've been using it, and that's how they ran the most recent game. And they're discussing that game and its fallout. And Todd and the guy who plays White, Robert, get into a tussling match, and the D20 falls on the mat. That's what we're seeing here. So keep scrolling, almost to the bottom. Well, that was longer than I expected. All right, so now we're at the end of the first chapter, and basically what we've seen is the die hits the mat, and we've set up our story problem. The D20's in this world, and if we don't get it out, we are in serious, serious trouble. The game world is going to detonate, and it'll create a magical explosion, which won't kill anybody necessarily, but it will get Todd's father sort of disbarred from the wizarding world. So I've kind of set that up. And this is all of the writing that I've done. It's just the first 2,000 words in the story. But now I know who all these players are. And since I understand who they are and what role they're going to fill in the story, it was much easier for me to plot out the rest of the book. So now let's go scene by scene, and we'll take a quick look at what I put together. So I tend to do Dan Harmon's Story Circle. There is a video on this channel that explains more about that if you're not familiar with it. It's one of many story structures that you can use. It very closely follows the hero's journey, and I do that in every book. So each sequel will follow the hero's journey in its own way. And then I'll drop in a chapter for each point of view. So you'll get Bert and then Kit, and then Bert and then Kit, and then sometimes White will be mixed in there if I need villain chapters. And then I work my way down until we get to the end. The You segment is basically just introducing your character. So the Bone to Pick chapter introduces Jess, player of Kit, and I'm just going to call her Kit going forward. Introduces Kit, and we get to see the other players. I also need to do Bert. So we're going to do Bert overseeing his kingdom, and the goal here is to show all the neat things that Bert has done since we have last seen him. Bert has, implemented a bunch of technologies and brought harmony and peace and has really made the world great, and we want to show that. And this is our opportunity to do that. Show the reader, hey, we've got something to lose now because Bert has built it. We flash back to Kit. And they realize the D20 has gone in the game world, which triggers the game, and it pulls them in too. Now, as soon as you hit the game world, your mind is kind of wiped. So they don't know why they're there necessarily, and to them, they're just playing the game. And they don't understand that there's sort of a time limit to what's going on. So when their characters arrive, they decide they're going to go kill the Dark Lord, and they start heading towards what was formerly the town of Placeholder and is now Bober Town. renamed obviously by Bert. So Bert has a council meeting. This is mostly just to do some humor. I wanted to use the finger of the king and also tell you a little bit more about what's going on in the various kingdoms so that we can introduce other nations and tribes like the Keeble Elves so that when we use them later, the reader knows that they existed. This is sort of where we plant that stuff. This is a setup chapter. And that's what you want to do. We start with you, so we're introducing the character. Need, what do they want? What is it they desperately need? So for Kit, she's got to get that D20 back. And for Bert, by the end of this chapter, we need to understand that he needs something. And so what he learns at the end of this chapter is this big meteor D20 fell from the sky, because it fell into the game world, and crashed in the Keeble Forest, and he needs to go deal with it. So he's got his need as well. So Bert heads into Keeble Forest, leaving Bobertown behind. He will be riding Boberton, who's much larger now. And he heads into the forest, which is dark and scary. And since he's gone, White and his companions can arrive in Bobertown and start causing trouble. That leads to the Road of Trial. So basically, we've now set up our circumstances. White is in Bobertown, and we know things are going to go badly, and Bert is going after this D20. And so for the Road of Trials, I won't go necessarily chapter by chapter, or this is going to turn into like an 80-minute video. I will go by the titles, though. You can see that I've got White setting up a White factory. He's going to build an undead factory and start mass producing them to try and build an army as quickly as possible. He finally uploads his tomb to a fortress. And meanwhile, Kit and Nut Puncher, who was Crotchshot, are now looking for Bert. They want to track him down because they know they're going to need Bert's help to stop White, and that White does, in fact, need to be stopped. So Bert heads into the forest and investigates the D20 that fell from the sky. He realizes that he can only move it if he has a pair of dirt mittens. There'll be a chapter around him trying and failing various strategies to get the die to move. But he's super intelligent now, so he very quickly realizes what the way to do it is. And then he starts moving it into the mountains. And so we're going to get all of that stuff. And this will be fun. This is like the quintessential Bert stuff that I love writing, where Bert is solving basic problems and just being Bert and meeting people. It's a ton of fun to write. So I'll buckle down into this area and flesh it out. But for now, when you're doing kind of a high-level overview and outline of what you're writing, you don't necessarily need that yet. So you can see some of these don't have any text at all. It's just a title that tells me roughly what that scene's going to be. Then I get here to Bert is finally hiding the D20 and begins making defenses. He realizes that this D20 is really bad. Players want it. I'm sorry, not just players, but everybody wants it. And they're killing each other over it. So he's building this whole series of traps around it. Now, what I've decided is I'm going to make this look a lot like Mount Doom so that I can rip off Lord of the Rings at the end in a comedic way. And so you'll see the setup here where everything he's building will sort of reinforce Mount Doom. And I might even kind of work in an Eye of Sauron kind of thing. I should close these as we finish them. So now we've gone through the Road of Trials. For those familiar with Dan Harmon's story circle, when you hit Meet the Goddess, we're passing from the passive side of the circle into the active side of the circle, which will lead us out of the underworld and back into the light. So this is where our heroes get what they think it is that they wanted, but find out that they, in fact, need something else entirely. So in this case, Bert manages to hide the D20, but then realizes, oh crap, White has taken over my kingdom. I've got to do something about it. So the D20 is, not the sole important thing that he thought it was. And then for White, he finishes his army and stuff, but he realizes that Bert is still out there somewhere. And he wants revenge. He wants to kill him, but he doesn't know where he is, and he needs to find him. And so even though he's conquered everything, and now he's sort of the king of Bobertown and, has his undead army and is super powerful, it just feels hollow to him. So he wants something further. And then finally for Kit kind of instinctively senses that there's something deeper at play. Like she knows the D20 is kind of the problem and needs to be solved. And so she's discontent as well. Now, once people have gotten sort of what they thought they wanted and you're moving on to the next phase, in the Take and Pay, your characters are usually giving something up in exchange for claiming the power or thing that they will need to win. And in this case, Bert is seeing what has happened to Bobertown. His sacrifice is all the stuff that he's lost in Bobertown. He has to see all the good people that have been slain by White because he was off dealing with this D20. And so he's really understanding the cost now. And since Bert and this is really the protagonist, I'm really leaning on that more than I am for Kit at this point. I may have Kit have more of a Take and Pay, but I'm not sure that's necessary yet. We'll see. And then finally you get to the return, and this is your finale, your Act 3 if you're a fan of a 3-act structure. And this is where your big confrontation between your protagonist and antagonist, if you have that, is going to occur. So in my case, we've basically got White versus Bert. Now, White wants to kill Bert at all costs. That's the thing that he most wants. That's sort of his story goal. And Bert knows that White needs to be eliminated because he's destroyed Bobertown and has done so much damage, and he's got to go. So Bert realizes that he can't take White on when he's in his keep, especially surrounded by an undead army. They've got to lure him out. So they send Nut Puncher in as a plant to say that he got bored and he left and he wants to join them again, which of course White accepts. He kind of brings him back into the fold. And then Nut Puncher, kind of casually drops the fact that, hey, there's this massively powerful D20 out there. And he heard a rumor that Bert was out there too with that D20. And so now White kind of knows where Bert is and wants to go after him. So White gathers up his undead army and mobilizes, and they head out into Keeble Forest to track down Bert, which is exactly what Bert was after. And you see kind of a tit for tat chapter after chapter where White is slogging through first the forest and then eventually the dungeon that Bert has built. And Bert is kind of shadowing it because ultimately Bert wants White to reach the D20. Everything that touches the D20 dies. So theoretically, if White touches the D20, he'll die too. And that's what Bert wants. And then at the very end, Bert realizes when White grabs the D20, now we're going to roll into change, which is where you sort of see evidence that our hero has become somebody different than they were at the beginning. Usually they're kind of returning home, or at least coming full circle. But right before we get there, Bert realizes what the D20 is. He sees it for what it is finally, and he realizes when it doesn't kill White, that its intent is for a real construct, a real person, to make stuff, a god, as Bert sees it. And Bert can't let White be a god. He's terrified that this much power will fall in White's hands. And so he jumps up on his hand, and this is going to be very Lord of the Rings, and bites off his finger in the same way that Gollum bit Frodo's finger off. And he falls into the volcano that'll be very similar to Mount Doom. Only before he hits the lava, instead of dying, I'm going to have him go full Neo. So think Neo from the Matrix. Bert touches the die, and here's where the interesting twist happens. Bert isn't just a construct anymore. It's become a living, sentient creature. And this is why magic is forbidden for this use. Lots of people back in the 1980s were making these D20s and were doing these magical worlds, but what they didn't realize is they're creating real worlds and real creatures were coming out of those. And so that became a very morally gray area. And so the wizarding world sort of tamped down on it and said we shouldn't be doing this anymore. And they're learning the hard way sort of why this is banned. Well, Bert is now a sentient creature, which means that Bert can be a GM. Any sentient creature doesn't have to be somebody from the real world. It also means that Bert can theoretically return to our world. Like he can actually leave this make-believe world. And all these implications are being shown to the reader in this chapter. And then I'm going to have White meet a fitting end. He's going to watch in horror as, Bert rises from the lava as a god, basically, and then turns him into something amusing. It'll probably take me a while to figure out exactly what will make for a funny ending here. I'm still not sure what to use. And then finally, in the last chapter, we need Kit and everybody to make it back into the real world. And the big shock is going to be, of course, that Bert comes into the real world too. And now we've got Todd's father involved. This is the mage that made the D20 in the mat originally. And he says they've got to destroy it. They've got to get rid of it. They've got to get rid of the evidence. Like, they can't keep this. And Bert, of course, protests that this world is his home and that he's alive and that there's other things that are alive here. How can they possibly wipe out this world? And so Dad realizes, you're right. I can't do this. I can't allow all these things to die. You guys have made a mistake, but now you have to live with it. And so how they decide to live with it is Bert is given the D20 and made the custodian of this world. And so what I'll do for book 3, and this is where writing a series comes in, you need to be thinking about what is the big plot going to be in the next book. Well, the next book is going to be Bert being a GM for the first time. Bert's going to learn to GM, and when the players play, you actually have Todd playing too. That's the guy that's the current GM. We'll play alongside everybody else, and Bert will run the adventures. And you'll get to see, sort of what the world looks like with Bert. So he'll still be somewhat antagonistic with White, but in a different way. And instead of, he'll basically be trying to provide entertainment for them. In any case, I don't know a lot about what book 3 will look like, but I know enough that I can commission the cover, which is important. You want to get out ahead of that if you're writing a series at any decent speed. And, enough that I can start working on it pretty soon. And this plot is also self-contained. So we get a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's pretty short. If you count up the chapters, I probably have 35 or less. Even after I like break stuff out when I start writing stuff, it probably won't eclipse 40. And what that means is this won't be a greater than 50,000 word novel. It's going to be very short, just like the first one. But I think that style really fits for Burt. You know, people are annoyed when they get to the end, but anything that I insert into there as filler to sort of artificially make these journeys longer is going to be identified as such. I need short, fun, self-contained stories. That's the brand I want to build for Burt. So all of these are considerations. Anyway, guys, I hope this is useful. I did see a couple of comments and I got a couple of emails after the last video that people said it wasn't as useful as they were hoping because it's more me just sort of talking about what I'm doing. Maybe I should have titled the videos differently. I don't know. But all I can really do is relate sort of the work that I'm doing and how I'm fleshing out a series in my case. And I know that's not useful for everybody and it's frustrating. Like if this isn't a genre that you use or if you write in a different style, like I would rather be able to present this differently and in a more holistic way that everybody could get value from. But that's unfortunately just not possible. You know, this is what I can cobble together. Anyway, thanks for sticking with me, guys. If you do enjoy the content, please, feel free to leave a comment. If you have questions, I would love to answer those. And if you have suggestions, drop those as well. You will notice that the PWM, the Penultimate Wizard Necromancer, came from a comment on the last video. Somebody suggested that as the acronym that we use for White's new superclass. So like little details like that are sort of leaking their way into the book, and you guys are very much helping me shape this, which has been a ton of fun. Anyway, guys, I do need to get back to the writing. My goal is next week you will see that about half the novel is written and the rest of the outline is fleshed out. So you'll get a look at how far along that is. I'm not really doing this challenge style. I'm taking my time with it and sort of contrasting that to the last book that I did to see if there's a difference in quality. I guess last point before I let you go, if you look at God's War and the reviews on it so far, people really do seem to enjoy the ending. And there are some complaints, obviously, there always are, but the complaints aren't about the speed at which it was written. And there are other issues that people wanted, like they wanted longer battles, or one person just said, the last two books really sucked, and I'm not sure why I stuck with it. But for the most part, the vast majority of the reviews are positive and 5-star, and people said, wow, you really nailed the emotional resonance. They may not understand that's what I was doing, but they said, wow, it was a perfect ending. So I don't think speed matters as much as some people say that it does. But at the same time, I am enjoying slowing down on Burt and having more time to work on this. I'm not nearly as productive this way, but I am enjoying the process more at the very least. So it's fun to alternate the two, have a deadline, crank something out, and then take a break and write something at my own pace. Anyway, guys, enough rambling from me. I am going to get back to work, and I will see you next week.